Let's talk about folk art real quick. Now, these days, folk tends to be more associated with things like Simon and Garfunkel, but here's an interesting observation. Simon and Garfunkel aren't folk. They're in the style of folk. Now, why split that hair? Because folk art actually has a specific meaning, and that's in reference to art that isn't created by any one person in particular. Folk art doesn't really have an identifiable author beyond the community as a whole, and importantly, it's not created by focused professionals. Folk stories, for example, are generated over years by people, by folk, adding, adapting, misremembering, and word-of-mouthing a story from person to person to person. As a result, these stories tend to be unfocused, meandering, oddly paced, infused with strange logical leaps, fantasy elements that don't really adhere to any coherent rules, and all around generally showing the signs of being the crowdsourced product of amateurs. And in a lot of ways, that's its own awesome thing and is part of the appeal. And this is kind of how I feel about the lure. I'm not saying that the lure feels like something crowdsourced by amateurs, but that it evokes a lot of the same jumbled end result. The Lure is a Polish synth-pop musical abstract fantasy horror about stripper mermaids who go through life on the surface dealing with mermaid problems like trying to get some action all up in your cloaca because your human parts are, to quote the film's opening scene, as smooth as a Barbie doll. As an example of this jumbled, fairy tale folklore sort of structure, at one point the sisters get into a fight where they hiss at each other and bounce off the walls. The fight is ended when their landlord punches them both in the face, knocking them out cold. He and his family, which includes the primary love interest by the way, then roll the sisters up in carpets and drop them off a bridge. An indeterminate time later, the sisters crawl out of the river, kill two dudes, eat their hearts, and show up back at the strip club to confront him, and all is forgiven after the brunette sister bites his thumb off. Now, I enjoyed this movie. I think. It is The Little Mermaid if the Disney version never existed, but they still wanted a musical because the screenwriter had a really big Across the Universe phase, and if you've seen Across the Universe and you watch The Lure, you will notice that it's a very deliberate comparison I'm making here. What I'm saying is that it's worth seeing, if only because there's almost nothing else out there remotely like it, and that alone makes up for a lot of the flaws, like an inscrutable plot, haphazard use of symbolic non-diegetic musical logic, really inconsistent subtitling, and some stilted acting. Style does eventually take its toll on substance, the hallucinatory logic of musicals short-circuiting a lot of the second act, but there's still something compelling in there, even if flawed. Also, side note, between Men and Chicken, Nuts, and The Lure, Cuff this year had a real subtext of human-animal sex hybrids.